This week on Low Budget Binge, look out for a violent weekend getaway, handheld homicide, Lovecraftian cults, a return to a haunted home, flying sharks, and then there's Maud! Welcome back to ML Miller Frights, a part of the Kings of Horror Network. I'm ML Miller. While you might be watching this video on the Kings of Horror Network, I urge you to click over to my ML Miller Frights YouTube page and give it a like. Please share with all of your buddies. Click subscribe to this channel, and don't forget to ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the paths less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, do-it-yourselves, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see in the usual Hollywood releases. I'll indicate in the review and down below where you can find these films, along with their trailers. Here we go. Sky Sharks is new on-demand, digital download, DVD, and Blu-ray. It's directed by Marc Fehse and written by Marc Fehse, Carsten Fehse, and A.D. Morel. An excursion to the Arctic awakens a secret Nazi plan which has been dormant since World War II. Zombie soldiers riding flying sharks. If only they had perfected this death weapon back then, they surely would have won that war. But that's not stopping long-thought-dead Nazi forces from rising up and taking over the airways. With the world on the brink of despair, it's up to one former Nazi scientist and his two buxom daughters to figure out a way to take out these flying toothy monstrosities and save the day. This is a dumb movie, but I have to say, it's a fun dumb movie. While it appears this might have been something set up for the Sci-Fi Network, the abundance of nudity and gore contradict what you usually see from the relatively family-friendly channel. Everyone has a vague German accent. Even some of the American actors, like Fright Night's Amanda Bierce, has a German accent for some reason. But because so much is going on from beginning to end, I can't say I was bored with this film. It understood why people would even take a chance with this movie by incorporating some gratuitous gore and even more gratuitous nudity about every 2 to 3 minutes. While I usually prefer a bit more depth to my horror, I didn't mind this brainless romp because the quality of the CG gore and the plastic surgery boobs were all well done all the way through. I do think Sky Sharks makes the mistake of taking itself a bit too seriously. The film clocks in at about an hour and a half with some teasers at the end featuring more gore and boobs, making it closer to an hour and 40 minutes. I think a film of this sort should be short and sweet and not overstay its welcome. During the third and fourth flashback info dump, I have to say, despite the gore and boobs, I was getting pretty weary of the concept. This would have been a highly enjoyable, sleazy gore fest had they lopped off about 20 minutes of exposition and CG future landscapes. Keep the gore, keep the boobs, just shave off some of the long info drops. What's funny is that this film goes into all of this detail about how the zombies are created, utilizing historical references to every war since World War II. But there's next to nothing explaining how they get those sharks to breathe out of water, let alone fly through the air. The CG is surprisingly good, and the gore is rendered in a wickedly gleeful way. This is a movie about zombies riding sharks attacking airplanes filled with some genre celebs like Robert Lazardo, Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood's Lar Park Lincoln, Tony Todd, among others popping in simply to get torn asunder by these toothy invaders. Also there's boobs. Lots of boobs. If that description makes you giggle a little, this is the type of film for you. Sacrifice is new on-demand and digital download from Epic Pictures and 101 Films. It's directed by Andy Collier and Tor Mann, and written by Andy Collier and Tor Mann, based on a story by Paul Kane, and inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. Isaac, played by Ludovic Hughes, and his very pregnant wife Emma, played by Sophie Stevens, travel to Norway to claim an inheritance which includes Isaac's childhood home. The couple plan on this being a quick trip, flip the house, and return in time to have the baby in the States. But once in Norway, Isaac is enchanted with the culture, his lost childhood, and the rich history of the Nordic land. While Emma grows impatient and wants to leave, Isaac feels compelled to stay and takes part in strange rituals led by the town sheriff, Renate, played by Barbara Crampton, which usually include nighttime meetings wearing robes and worshipping otherworldly gods older than time itself. Right there in the opening credits, Sacrifice pays homage to the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and while it doesn't adapt one specific story, the influence is heavy throughout. Emma has multiple dreams of tentacle creatures pulling her and Isaac under the water, and the town does seem to have some kind of fascination with squiddly things. Filmed in Norway, Sacrifice really does a good job of soaking in the rich and foreboding atmosphere of the Nordic Highlands. The rolling hills and still waters make the entire film feel as if it is filled with fantasy and wonder. It's a fantastic locale to make a horror movie. The acting is strong. Isaac is annoying and sort of an ass, but the character Ludovic Hughes plays is supposed to make you feel that way. Sophie Stevens is strong here, but I preferred her star-making performance in The Haunted over this more cliched role as the hysterical pregnant woman. Barbara Crampton is always a delight to see, though her part is small compared to the screen time of the couple. While her Nordic accent sort of comes and goes, her presence gives the movie some horror geek cred. The biggest problem with Sacrifice is that it's all dream sequence and very little by way of story. I lost count at the number of nightmares Emma wakes up from as slimy tentacles tickle, touch, and wrap around her. I understand that with her pregnancy, Emma is supposed to be hormonal and sensitive, and nightmares are quite common. Still, I think this tactic is repeated way too many times, and the law of diminishing returns really acts as a detriment to the movie. If you take out the dream sequences, there really isn't anything that horrifying going on until the punchline at the very end of Sacrifice. I really like the way this film ended. It's reminiscent of other folksy horror films like Midsommar, The Wicker Man, and HBO's recent The Third Man series, but manages to toss in a twist that makes things feel pretty fresh. Unfortunately, the lead-up to this end revelation feels kind of fluffy, as if this might have made for a better short story than a full-length feature. It's not a film that's going to blow you over with earth-shattering revelations. This is a smaller-scale film, with a more personal punch at the end, but the punch worked for me. Reunion is new in select theaters, on-demand, and digital download from Dark Sky Films. It's directed and written by Jake Mahaffy. Ellie, played by Emma Draper, returns to her childhood home very pregnant and hoping to have some peace and quiet in order to finish writing her new book. She isn't expecting to see her mother, Ivy, played by Julia Ormond, there. Because she has just left her boyfriend, Ellie has no real place to go, so she stays anyway. The longer Ellie stays in the home, as Ivy packs it up to be sold, dark secrets from Ellie's past resurface, involving the adoption of a young girl named Kara, played by Ava Keane, and her father's odd secret experiments he had conducted in his lab. Reunion is an odd film. It seems to be a mishmash of psychological horror, ghost story, and late in the game, injects hints of body horror to the narrative just for shits and giggles. The setting of this story is extremely effective as Ivy and Ellie make their way through boxes and boxes of packed things in order to deal with past trauma by busying themselves with day-to-day activities. The stress of moving is an overwhelming one, and the fact that this is a house being packed away is both rich in symbolism regarding the past both Ivy and Ellie want to leave behind them, and the chaos of making sense out of a lifetime of accumulated stuff. It's interesting that Ellie chooses to come to this place of unrest to find some kind of peace when it represents anything but quiet and still. As a psychological thriller, Reunion works as both Ormond and Draper deliver strong and restrained performances. Both are educators and used to thinking things through in a meticulous and scientific way. This isn't a warm household, but one that analyzes feelings and emotions and comes to a logical conclusion to it all. It makes for a conflicted performance given Ellie's pregnancy and Ivy's added stress from the move, as both seem to act irrational and emotionally, yet try to explain it all away scientifically. When the spirit of Kara shows up, it unsettles Ellie, as it reminds her of a tragedy from her youth. But Ivy's answer to that is to shield emotions and explain it all away. The entire film seems to highlight the contrast between the spiritual and resonant emotions like guilt, sorrow, and loss, and an educated distance from it that seems to have haunted this family from the very beginning. I think the problem with Reunion is that it's a story with an awful lot of secrets. Everyone seems to remember these tragic childhood events in their own way, placing blame on someone different. While there may be some kind of haunting going on, it's not your typical haunted house movie with moving doors and creaking floorboards, though there are a few scant scenes of that going on. Then at the last minute, there's this weird mad science angle that I don't know if I fully understand. The film sort of tosses all of these truths in the air in the end, leaving the viewer to latch on to which one they want to believe, and then ending with no firm resolution. The acting is wonderful, the mood and atmosphere really works. This is an above-average produced film with all sorts of interesting things going on, like little snippets of Ellie's book being read set to slides of odd drawings of scientific oddities. But I don't know if all of the puzzle pieces fit in Reunion, and was left unsatisfied by the way it all ended. Death Trip is new on demand and digital download from Gravitas Ventures. It's directed by James Watts, and written by James Watts and Kelly K. Hurcomb, who also stars in the movie. A group of kids leave town for the weekend to stay at a cottage in the country. They've all been friends for ages and look forward to spending the chilly weekend partying and having fun. But it seems next door to the cottage lives a man who may have killed his wife some time ago. Though they're cautious, they continue to party down and even meet some locals and head to their party for a bit. They don't know it, but something dark and deadly is brewing, and it means bad things for our group of party people. I really dug the style of Death Trip. It does a sort of montage of imagery that sets a somber and dangerous mood by showing scenes of some kind of crime. Blood is spattered on the walls and floors. There are no bodies, but it's obvious some kind of violence has occurred. Without really warning you, Death Trip also shows quick clips of our cast frantically running through the woods covered in blood. It's all spices up the first hour, which really only follows our 4 leads while they party down. Toss in a pair of creepy and atmospheric dream sequences, and it really does work in giving even the more jovial scenes a sense of depth and gravity. I also like the way Death Trip highlights the paranoia and unease one might have when entering the domain of a stranger. The group shows up to a house party, and they don't know anyone there. It really does capture that feeling that something bad is about to happen. There's a palpable sense of terror in the air, despite the fact that everyone is smiling and drinking and seemingly having a good time. While it doesn't dole out death and carnage, the feeling that horror is just around the corner permeates these scenes, and this film captures that horror excellently. While I appreciate the effort to punch up the first hour with fast-forward clips, atmospheric scenes, and nightmarish sequences, this film really takes a long time to get to where it wants to get. With a name like Death Trip, you know things are going to get gnarly. But the film seems to want to trick you into a false sense of security and take you on a few side quests before it really gets to the horror. Once the horror begins, though, it's pretty brutal, culminating in a vicious battle with hammers on a frozen lake. I wish Death Trip would have restructured the story to get to the gore and the horror and violence earlier. There's a scene where one of the characters goes missing that I think could have happened much earlier on, and it would have made for a much quicker descent into hell. As is, there's a sense of tossing everything in the kitchen sink in towards the end that would have been much more fluid had the hanging around time been truncated. It was interesting getting to know these characters, but if your horror film doesn't really get into the horror until about the hour and 15 mark, I think there's a problem. I don't want to be too hard on Death Trip, as I feel filmmaker James Watts peppers in some nicely paced scare sequences, and the brutality towards the end is well done. It looks like a lot of fun was had making this film, as evidenced by the extended attention to the party scenes. But while it might have made for a fun shoot, it ends up being filler with a few well-done scare scenes sprinkled in. I'm mixed on this one because there is talent in the direction and the acting feels natural. If you don't mind the slow and meandering pace, this little slasher-esque film might be for you. Finally, we have the found footage film I Blame Society, which is new on demand and digital download from Cranked Up Films. It's directed by Gillian Wallace Horvat and written by Gillian Wallace Horvat and Chase Williamson. Aspiring filmmaker Gillian, played by writer-director Gillian Wallace Horvat, has hit a creative wall. When she receives what she takes to be a compliment that she would make for a great serial killer, she takes it to heart and decides to set out to become one. At first, this is all just a hypothetical situation, but the longer Gillian gets into this new project, the more dedicated she is to making everything seem authentic as possible. Gillian stalks victims, breaks into their houses, and plans to kill them, all the while being filmed through her iPhone and her friend's camera. But once Gillian crosses the line, she finds she really is pretty good at killing, and getting better with every murder. I Blame Society would be considered a found footage film, and while those types of films seem to have had its heyday, I still enjoy watching first-person POV films when they're done really well and have a good story. This definitely fits the bill. While there definitely is a lot of social commentary amidst Gillian's gradual breakdown in I Blame Society, the most fascinating and freshest aspects of the film come from this gradual descent and the psychological disintegration of our protagonist's mind. It's a believable descension into the depths as Gillian inches her way towards psychopathy, and I found myself really enwrapped in this journey. This path is extremely believable and, more importantly, interesting and entertaining all the way through. This is mainly because of the wicked sense of humor the film possesses. Gillian is a funny person. She's quirky and dark. Instead of being appalled when she is called a good candidate to be a serial killer, she embraces it. She's having a blast planning this thing, and her enthusiasm is present in every scene she films. It's because of this likability that this film works, and I don't know if many actresses would have been able to pull this off, as Gillian does some pretty heinous things. There's something about her line delivery when she whispers, "I'm living my best life," while sipping her intended victim's wine while she sleeps inches away, that comes off as infinitely charming, despite the morbidity of it all. I also love the moment where, in order to cheer herself up after becoming depressed with all of this killing, Gillian chooses to do a makeover video. It's so absurdly fun. I found the psychology at play in I Blame Society to be fascinating as well. The film begins with what really seems to be the inciting moment of Gillian's descent when she confronts her friend Chase, played by Chase Williamson, who helped co-write this film, about his toxic relationship with his girlfriend, who she has dubbed Stalin, played by Proxy's Alexia Rasmussen. This awkward conversation is all captured on camera in broad daylight, and it really sets the tone for Gillian's odd and off-putting demeanor while hinting at what horrors are to come. While Gillian doesn't seem to want to admit it, she seems to care deeply for Chase, maybe even in an intimate way, and she seems insensitive as to what this revelation might do to Chase as she plans on killing his girlfriend, hypothetically, of course. Later, it's equally fascinating how quickly Gillian falls into deviant and dangerous behaviors as she begins walking the streets in search of victims, having unprotected sex, drinking more and more, and of course upping her kill count. Never once along the way does it feel like a crazy leap. It all feels gradual and constant, watching a broken person tragically slide into despair. The way I Blame Society addresses some of the more hot-button gender politics of the day is pretty interesting as well. There are a few scenes where Gillian meets with a pair of male producers who use the same buzzwords like strong female lead and intersectionality over and over that really do shed some light on the real way, quote-unquote, enlightened Hollywood is trying to adjust to accommodate female filmmakers by basically wanting Gillian to put her name on a project made by others in hopes to get woke cred. These scenes are wonderfully meta in that it highlights just how shallow Hollywood really is, as if anyone doubted that in the first place. I was less concerned with following my usual found footage questionnaire that tests the authenticity of a found footage film, as this is a film being produced by Gillian, so the occasional presence of music, edits, and production really didn't bother me here. The film wobbles towards the end, the darker it gets, and while it addresses the fact that Gillian is becoming less likable, it doesn't stop her from actually getting less likable, the worse her murder spree intensifies. There are a few missed moments I feel were never really wrapped up in a satisfying way, like some kind of resolution between Gillian and her slacker boyfriend, but overall this is a consistently entertaining film that isn't afraid to go dark when it needs to. I Blame Society is a witty and wry take on how dreams of stardom can quickly and easily become murderous nightmares if you aren't careful. That'll be it for today. Please chime in down below in the comments and let me know how on the nose or mind-numbingly wrong I am, or you can counter with your own review. So guys, you know how YouTube works. I'd love to be able to dedicate more time to this channel. I'm not monetized yet, so if you want to help me out, remember to hit all the pertinent bells and whistles down below. Want some spooky comics to read? I have 2 new horror comic book trade paperbacks you should look out for. Both Gravetrancers and Pirouette, collecting never-before-published issues, can be found in only the finest of comic book shops. If you're looking for written reviews, you can find them on my website, mlmillerwrites.com. If you really want to show your support, I also have a Patreon page at mlmiller. Look for the link to my Patreon page down below. Thank you so much for your time, and take care. You're doomed.